In the world of Westeros, grief is not a luxury. It is a weapon, and for Rhaenyra Targaryen, firstborn of Viserys, the rightful queen of the Seven Kingdoms, the death of her son Lucerys was not just grief. It was the breaking of a dam that had held back a lifetime. What if the woman who had been told her entire life to be patient, to be measured, to be diplomatic? What if the murder of her 13-year-old boy over the black waters of Shipbreaker Bay finally shattered that restraint? What if Rhaenyra Targaryen, the realm's delight, became something far more dangerous than anyone had ever imagined? What if she burned them all? This is that story. The Raven arrived at Dragonstone before dawn. The painted table was still littered with war markers, carved wooden dragons and lions and roses scattered across the map of Westeros like a child's game. Rhaenyra stood at its head, her hands resting on the edge, her belly still aching from the stillbirth that had claimed her youngest child only days before. She had already buried one baby. Now, the maesters were whispering about another son. Daemon entered the chamber alone. No guards. No heralds, just the rogue prince with a face carved from stone and a piece of parchment crushed in his fist. He crossed the room in silence, leaned close to Rhaenyra's ear, and spoke. The words didn't register at first. She blinked. Her lips parted. The candles on the painted table guttered as if the room itself had exhaled. Then the scream came. It wasn't a cry. It wasn't a wail. It was something raw and primal. The sound of a woman whose very soul had been torn from her chest. It echoed through the stone corridors of Dragonstone and reached the ears of every guard, every servant, every lord and lady who had pledged their sword to her cause. Outside, in the darkness of the Dragonmont, Arrax lifted her great golden head and answered with a roar that shook the fortress walls. Rhaenyra's hands found the edge of the painted table. Her fingers whitened around the wood. When she lifted her head, her eyes were dry, not from composure, from fury so total that her body had forgotten how to weep.
Who?
Daemon held her gaze.
Aemond. He rode Vhagar into the storm after Luke left Storm's End. Arrax never had a chance. They found his head washed up on the rocks 3 days later. Luke's body was never recovered.
Silence. Terrible silence. The kind that comes before a wildfire ignites. Rhaenyra's voice emerged like a blade, drawn slowly from a sheath.
They stole my father's crown. They stole my throne. They stole my birthright. And now they have murdered my son.
She turned to face Daemon, and what he saw in her eyes made even the rogue prince take half a step back.
No more ravens. No more envoys. No more words.
Daemon tilted his head, a flicker, not of concern but of recognition. He had waited 20 years to hear this voice from her.
What would you have me do?
Wake every dragon on this island, every single one. We fly at first light.
And King's Landing?
Rhaenyra's jaw tightened.
I am going to burn the Red Keep to the ground. I am going to melt the Iron Throne into slag and pour the molten steel at Alicent Hightower's feet. And I am going to find Aemond One-Eye, wherever he hides. And I am going to teach him what it means to murder a queen's child.
Daemon stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, deliberately, he smiled. Not the cruel smirk he wore for the court, but something deeper, something almost reverent.
I'll ready Caraxes.
Within the hour, the Black Council was summoned. They gathered in the chamber of the painted table, Lord Corlys Velaryon, leaning on a cane and still pale from his wounds in the stepstones. Princess Rhaenys, the queen who never was, her silver hair pulled back and her face grim. Viserys, Rhaenyra's eldest surviving son, still wind-burned from his flight north and ignorant of his brother's fate until this very moment. Maester Gerardis, Lord Bartimus Celtigar, Sir Eric Cargyle, and Daemon, standing behind Rhaenyra like a shadow with teeth. Lord Corlys spoke first, as was his nature.
Your Grace, I grieve with you. Luke he was my blood too, my grandson. But we must not let rage dictate our...
Rhaenyra cut him off without raising her voice.
Lord Corlys, your counsel has been invaluable, but the time for counsel is over. Every moment we spend talking, Aemond One-Eye draws breath. Every hour we deliberate, Alicent Hightower sits in my father's castle, on my father's throne, wearing my father's crown on her bastard son's head.
The room shifted. Viserys stepped forward, his face pale, his voice cracking. He had just been told. His eyes were red, his hands were shaking, but he was his mother's son. Rhaenys spoke carefully.
Rhaenyra, I understand your pain more than most. But an attack on King's Landing with dragons, the small folk, the innocents in Flea Bottom.
Rhaenys,
Rhaenyra's voice was quiet, dangerously quiet.
they murdered a 13-year-old boy, a child who went as an envoy, not a soldier, a boy who swore on the seven-pointed star that he would not fight, and they chased him through a storm.
They hunted him through a storm on the largest dragon in the world and tore him apart over the open sea.
Her voice trembled, but not with weakness, with volcanic, barely contained wrath.
I will offer the small folk time to flee. I will give them until dawn. But when the sun rises over King's Landing tomorrow, the only green thing left alive in that city will be the moss on the ruins.
Daemon leaned against the painted table and addressed the room with casual precision.
Syrax, Caraxes, and Meleys alone could end this war before the next sunset. Add Vermax, and there isn't a wall or a fleet or a dragon alive that can stop us. Vhagar is old. She's massive, but she's slow. And Aemond is arrogant. He'll try to fight, and he'll die in the sky like the kinslayer he is.
Lord Corlys looked to Rhaenys. Rhaenys looked at the painted table, at King's Landing marked with a tiny wooden tower, no bigger than her thumb. She thought of her own children, of Laenor, whose death still haunted her, of Laena, who chose dragon fire over a slow death in childbed, of Luke, who had called her grandmother and meant it with every fiber of his young heart. When Rhaenys lifted her gaze, her eyes were cold.
Meleys and I will fly with you.
Corlys closed his eyes. He knew. In that moment, every single person in that room knew. The dance of the dragons would not be a war of attrition. It would not be a campaign of alliances and blockades and patient maneuvering. It would be a single, shattering act of dragonfire. Swift, total, and merciless. Rhaenyra turned to the map. She placed her hand on King's Landing.
Daemon, you will take Caraxes along the Blackwater from the west, draw out their scorpions, their defenses, make them look at you.
With pleasure.
Rhaenys, you and Meleys will come from the south, over the harbour, destroy the fleet, cut off their escape by sea.
Rhaenys nodded once. Sharp, military.
Jace, you and Vermax will circle high above the city. Anyone who flees by land to the north, let them go. We are not here for the small folk. We are here for the serpents in the Red Keep.
Jace's voice was raw.
And you, Mother?
Rhaenyra's fingers curled on the painted table, her nails dragging across the surface of the Crown Lands.
Syrax and I will go straight for the Red Keep, straight for the Iron Throne. And if Aemond or Aegon or any of Alicent's brood wants to stop me, they can try. They can mount Vhagar and Sunfire and Dreamfire and anything else they have. It will not matter.
She looked up.
My father named me heir before 1,000 lords. The gods witnessed it. The realm witnessed it. And now the realm will see what happens when you steal a crown and murder a queen's child.
They launched at dawn. 4 dragons rose from Dragonstone into a sky painted in bands of crimson and gold, as if the heavens themselves were bleeding. Syrax came first, her massive golden scales catching the first light like hammered bronze. Rhaenyra sat her saddle, not like a queen, but like a conqueror, her silver hair loose, her crown abandoned on the painted table. She wore no finery, just riding leathers and a sword at her hip that had been Viserys's, a king's sword for the work of kings. Behind her, Caraxes screamed into the wind, that hideous, beautiful shriek that had haunted the stepstones for years. Daemon rode with his head bare, and Dark Sister strapped across his back, his cloak snapping behind him like a war banner. The blood-worm's serpentine body cut through the clouds, like a crimson ribbon unraveling across the sky. Meleys rose in magnificent silence, her scarlet scales and copper wingbones gleaming. Rhaenys rode with the stoic grace of a woman who had spent her entire life being told she could not rule, and who had decided, at last, that if she could not rule, she would destroy those who had stolen the right. And Vermax, young, fierce, olive-green Vermax, climbed highest of all, with Viserys leaning into the wind, tears streaming from his eyes, not tears of grief, tears of velocity, tears of purpose. He was 17 years old, and he was riding to war for his dead brother, and there was nothing in the world that could have stopped him. The small folk on the shores of Dragonstone watched them go and fell to their knees. Some prayed, some wept, some simply stared, because there are moments in history so enormous that the human mind cannot process them as they happen, only afterward in the telling. 4 dragons flying west, the sky darkening behind them, not with clouds, but with the shadow of their wings. And in King's Landing, the bells began to ring. Sir Otto Hightower was the first to hear the report. A fisherman's skiff had spotted them over the gullet. 4 shapes against the sunrise, moving fast, impossibly fast. 2 red, 1 gold, and 1 green. Coming from the east, coming from Dragonstone. Within minutes, every bell in King's Landing was ringing. The great bronze bells of the Sept of Baelor, the iron bells on the walls of the Red Keep, the small, frantic bells of the Dragon Pit. They rang and rang and rang, and the sound washed over the city like a tide of iron. In the throne room, Aegon II Targaryen sat on the Iron Throne and tried very hard not to look afraid. He was failing. The crown of Aegon the Conqueror sat heavy on his brow, and sweat beaded beneath it. His hand gripped the arm of the throne, and he felt the old swords bite into his palm, drawing thin lines of blood. Alicent Hightower stood beside him, straight-backed, her face a mask of porcelain composure. But her eyes were calculating, running through every scenario, every alliance, every possible defense, and finding, for the first time in her meticulous life, that she had none. Aegon's voice cracked.
Where is Aemond?
Your brother flew south to rally the Reach. He has Vhagar. He will...
He's not here, Mother!
Aegon slammed his fist on the throne. Blood smeared across the ancient steel.
He killed her boy, and now she's coming with 4 dragons, and he's not here. Sunfire can't... You know Sunfire can't face Caraxes alone, let alone Syrax and Meleys.
Alicent's mask slipped, just for a moment, just enough to reveal the terror beneath.
Then we offer terms. We offer everything. The crown, the throne, whatever she wants.
Aegon laughed. It was not a pleasant sound.
You think terms will satisfy her? You heard what Aemon did. He killed a child, Mother. Her child. A boy she sent as a messenger. There are no terms for that. There is only dragonfire.
Somewhere far above the city, a roar split the sky, then another, then 2 more, layering on top of each other until the sound was a single, continuous avalanche of noise that rattled the stained glass windows of the throne room. The dragons had arrived. Through the great windows of the throne room, Aegon saw them, dark shapes wheeling against the morning sky, impossibly large, impossibly real. The gold flash of Syrax banking over the black water, the crimson streak of Caraxes diving toward the harbor, the copper brilliance of Meleys circling high above the city walls, and above them all, a dark green silhouette that could only be Vermax, orbiting like a hawk above a field of mice. The bells kept ringing. The small folk began to scream, and from across the Blackwater rush, carried by wind and fury and 20 years of stolen patience, came a voice amplified by dragonfire and rage. A queen's voice, unmistakable, absolute, final.
Aegon! Alicent! You have until the sun clears the walls of the Red Keep to open the gates and kneel. Refuse me, and I will turn this city to ash. Every tower, every wall, every stone that bears the Hightower name. There will be no second chance. There will be no mercy. You stole my crown, and you murdered my son.
Then Aegon stood from the Iron Throne, blood dripping from his palms, and spoke 2 words that sealed the fate of everyone inside the walls of King's Landing.
Close the gates!
In Part 2, Rhaenyra unleashes the full fury of the Black Dragons on King's Landing. Aemond races back on Vhagar for a final confrontation. Alicent makes a desperate gamble, and the Iron Throne will be claimed, but at a cost that will echo through 1,000 years of Westerosi history. You don't want to miss it. If this story gave you chills, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below. What do you think Rhaenyra should do first when the gates stay closed? Burn the walls? Go straight for the Red Keep? Let us know.